the hotel rooms had no shower curtains, and we were told that by CIA briefings and things that there were cameras in the mirrors in the bathrooms, which was so disconcerting.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. And today I am so honored to be fulfilling my promise to you, which is to bring you an amazing success story with every episode. And I'm going to do that today with me and Shelby Scarbrough. Shelby, thank you so much and welcome to the show.
So great to be here. Thanks, Mike.
So let me tell you a little bit about Shelby before we get started so you know what you're in for. So Shelby is an entrepreneur, an author, an angel investor, and a speaker. And then that's just like touching the surface. I don't want to get into everything because I don't want to ruin all the surprises, but let me tell you a little bit more. Shelby combines an entrepreneurial background with the pride and responsibility of public service to bring new perspectives to each endeavor. Her career began as a political appointee in the Reagan and Bush administrations, first as presidential trip coordinator in the White House, which is a then as a protocol officer at the U.S. Department of State. And I'm going to have to ask you what that is later, Shelby, because that one I don't know. So Shelby's worked with some pretty notable figures that you may recognize. Pope John Paul II, for example, Presidents Reagan, Bush, Ford, Carter, and Nixon. President Walesa of Poland, who hopefully most of you remember, Lech Walesa, right? Queen Elizabeth, members of the royal family, Margaret Thatcher, Nelson Mandela, and the list goes on and on and on. So she's kept some pretty good company over the years. She's planned events all over the world, from the Vatican to Buckingham Palace to the Kremlin, and of course the White House. She's founded Practical Protocol in 1990 as an international special events management and business protocol training organization, which specialized in custom design plans which address the unique needs of high-profile clients, like diplomats and like some of the people that I mentioned previously. And what's interesting, what you'll find out, is what Shelby's done with that business since she started it, kind of as one business, and then I call it shifted instead of pivoted, but she shifted, and I'm interested to explore that with her. She's also been a Burger King franchisee, which I just find amazing. I have my McDonald's little Diet Coke here. So
from the competition, no less.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of, I don't know. It's like my favorite. I don't know what to tell you. Yeah. So in addition to that stuff and a lot of the stuff I didn't mention, one thing I do want to say is that she's used her time in the last couple of years really well. So one of the things that I'm most excited to talk with Shelby about, and hopefully she's most excited to talk about too, is her Global School of Entrepreneurs, which is an MBA program that she has created, and a school that she's created. And I love the idea of it. So in addition to that, she's got so many chairmanships and boardships and all of these things. And I'll put a bunch of them in the show notes, but it's amazingly impressive. So, Shelby, I start every show with the same simple question. How did it happen for you?
Wow. Where could we start, right? On ramps. I think I immediately see the Beltway of Washington, D.C. as the image. And there's a lot of on ramps and off ramps, to navigating Washington. But when you think about it in terms of an entrepreneurial journey, it's the same thing. There's lots of ways on and lots of ways off. For me, I mean, literally, I was born into an entrepreneurial mindset from my family. And one of the things that kind of motivates me is a little bit of the question of, are entrepreneurs born or made? And I could argue both sides. I was born working in a Burger King, not literally, but when I was 15, my parents began that journey for themselves. And we were right there along the way, my sisters and I, sweeping the floor, cleaning the dining room, and then eventually working every position there was, including taking apart shake machines and things like that. So, and management and all of those, the training programs that came along with it. So we got, our hands dirty early on and learned really great skill sets about showing up and being present and giving it your all, and what it means to be a business owner, what it means to take risk, and what it means to employ people. But then I left college. I went to college and left college and went and joined the government, which is probably the most opposite possible form of work you could do. Except that I think that the parallel is I was really fortunate enough to have my real first full-time job was in the Reagan White House. And of all the branches of government and all the departments and all the offices you could work in, the White House is is close to an entrepreneurial endeavor as you can find in government, because it has to move quickly, it has to think quickly, it has to be prepared on the front edge of everything, ahead of the curve, setting the standards, innovating. If people always compare it to the West Wing or ask the West Wing, friends from different countries often say to me, is it like working in the West Wing in the television show? And I would say, sort of. It's usually a little calmer than the television show portrayed, but at the same time, you had to work on 3 levels at all times. There's the political, there's the governance level, and then there's the interpersonal level, your diplomatic level. You're constantly, everything you do is weighed in 3 levels. So you end up learning to think in 3D. And so the long, short drive here to off a cliff, I guess, is that's where it all started for me. How did it happen?
Okay, well, hopefully we don't go off a cliff. But if we do, we will execute a parachute and we will land safely, because we started this podcast late at 11:11, and that's your favorite. So this is all gonna work. So thank you for that. First I do want to ask about the protocol position, because protocol officer at the U.S. Department of State, just so people have an understanding of what that is, because I don't know.
Yeah, a common misperception is that the Office of Protocol is in the White House, and it may be slightly technical difference. It's based in the State Department, right? Just literally inside the front door of the State Department, because we're sort of the front face, the first face, and we help coordinate the visits of heads of state and kings, queens, prime ministers, and foreign ministers to Washington, D.C. to visit the President of the United States and to visit Congress. And we take care of, as a protocol officer, we take care of the programs. The distinction between what I did at the White House was the skill sets were essentially the same, with the added twist of a lot more international interaction at the State Department, because we're constantly dealing with the embassies and the ambassadors and the teams from the foreign delegations. Whereas in the White House, we were dealing with the president as the client, so to speak, and taking him through his paces, planning his day down into 3 to 5 minute segments, and setting up the events and walking him through that. So if I was in the White House, we would be setting up for a visit of the head of state from that perspective. But at the State Department, my client was the head of state, okay, and looking at it through their lens and getting them where they needed to go to meet the president.
Okay, got it. And does the term protocol come into play because it's not just the logistics of all that, but it's the cultures and, making sure that everybody's aware of what you can do, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, or is that?
Yes. The word protocol is Greek, and it literally means first glue. So if you think, it's not very sexy, but if you think about it in terms of what we're trying to do is create a bond, and our role is, look, I mean, your introduction, I sit and listen to it and I think, oh, it's almost embarrassing, because it's just almost embarrassing. But the point is, because I know the nitty gritty, dirty stuff, not ugly stuff, but just that it's not as glamorous as it sounds all the time. And what I did was, I'm not in charge of world peace, but I was a facilitator, an implementer, and a helper in bringing together 2 countries or 3 countries or 10 countries and our leaders to talk to one another. So my role, look, I was 22 years old when I started the White House. How important could I have been? Right. But I had a lot of pride in the fact that I was part of that process to bring people together. And we had a high degree of professionalism and perfection. Well, I've come to understand and learn is not really the true objective, or at least it's not my objective anymore, that excellence is. But when you start out in a job that expects perfection and then you back off from there, it gives you such great training ground for expectations and professionalism in your attitude about everything. So this was sort of kind of I don't know, it was a gift I was given to be able to do this job for our country and for the president.
I like the way you put that, excellence, not perfection. And it's, yeah.
We had a fun, I just talked about this and we'll get into the business school stuff, but I just talked about this in our most recent class, was the idea that, giving feedback, providing feedback and professional feedback, it's often very difficult to provide constructive feedback. And there's a kind of a formula for it. There are a couple of different formulas for it. But one of the things that we did in protocol, my boss in protocol at the time was a woman named Bunny Murdoch. And she was the deputy chief of protocol. And we would come back from a visit, having executed a visit. There would be one of us who would be in charge of the visit and the rest of us would support it. And then we would just rotate. So we got used to being leaders and followers and implementers and drivers all the time, and team players. And we would come back and talk about things in terms of what was the story. Okay, let's talk about the story. What went wrong is what we were talking about. So we celebrated the funny part of the fact that nothing was perfect, even though we were striving for perfection. And we recognized and owned the fact that when something went wrong, and those actually ended up being the best stories, because if nothing ever went wrong, there was nothing to talk about. But we also tried to learn from those so that that wasn't a mistake that got repeated if it was something we could control.
Got it. That reminds me a lot of, I had a fellow on my podcast, Cujo Tershner, who was a fighter pilot. And he talked about this debrief thing that they did after every mission, whether it was a training mission or an actual mission or whatever, where they would basically do what you just described. Let's tell the story about what actually happened, and let's see, where we did. Maybe we did excellent or maybe perfect, and where we, have opportunities to improve. And it sounds like something that you learned how to do at an early age. And I think that is something that now not a lot of people get the opportunity to do, because now, and I don't know if this is the right way to say it, but it's kind of hard, like you said, giving feedback. People are so used to hearing that you like everything that they're doing, that it's maybe a little bit more it's more difficult to have these really productive debriefs or whatever you called them, and about getting better, because nobody wants to think that they didn't do great,
We all make mistakes, and things happen that are out of our control. But if you learn from them, then you can start to anticipate things. So I think that was one of the greatest gifts that I had from that era of my life, was to anticipation, learning to be 3 steps ahead. And the office I worked in was the office at the White House, was the Office of Presidential Advance. So the words in the office have meaning. Protocol, creating that bond, and people think of protocol or etiquette, manners, all those kinds of things as ways to create differences with us and distance, when really the point of them is to help us have a common communication platform so that we can then get past those basic things and be able to actually talk about substantive stuff.
Okay.
So, it was such great training ground.
Yeah, because as you were saying that, I was thinking, okay, so we're 99.9% the same, and we're 0.1% different because of where we grew up or what our religion is, or our parents, or whatever. So let's figure out a way to get that part out of the way, so that we're not messing, just getting off on the wrong foot. And then the 99.9% that we have in common, we can start to have a dialogue towards progress on whatever it is we're trying to make progress on. Nice. So when you went to the State Department, was that a promotion? How did you get selected? How did you get selected?
How did it happen?
Yeah.
Well, I remember it very, very well. A friend of mine, the wife of one of my very first boss in Washington, his wife was the assistant chief of protocol in the ceremonials office. It's divided by visits and ceremonials and sort of the the bureaucracy aspect of it too. And so she puts on the parties basically, right? All the flowers, all those wonderful things that that she was so expert at. So she was in Moscow and we were in Moscow. And now remember, in the time that we were there was with President Reagan, was the Cold War, and it was glasnost and perestroika and all of this kind of stuff. So it was just the beginning of the thaw. But they were listening to everything we did. And we had no privacy. We were in a thing called the New Office Building, which was part of the embassy, but it was riddled with bugs, and they knew it. So they could never occupy it. They decided not to occupy, but they put us, the presidential advance team, there. But we knew that we were being watched and listened to. So whenever we had to have a conversation, we had to go into one of those, looks like a big walk-in refrigerator, you know, it was a private conference room that had protection around it so that nobody could listen to what was being said inside. So this woman, Pam Ahern, asked me if I could take a walk and walk down because she wanted to have a private conversation with me. And I sort of laughed because I thought, well, the Russians are going to know what we're talking about. I should say the Soviets are going to know what we're talking about. But, you know, my colleagues aren't. That's the only privacy we had. And she said, Lucky Roosevelt, Ambassador Roosevelt, who is the chief of protocol, is interested in knowing if you know anybody who would be interested in an opening we have in the protocol office for a visits officer, which is the logistics side, the planes, trains, automobiles. It's the overall visit coordinators. And I said, oh, well, let me think about that. And she goes, no, you're not understanding me. Mrs. Roosevelt, I think Ambassador Roosevelt had a kind of a code, and I don't know if it was a formal agreement, but that they wouldn't poach people from each other's offices. So she was trying to do it in a diplomatic way and sort of say, hint, hint, we want to see if you're interested.
Yes. Okay.
And I said, oh, it kind of hit me.
Yeah.
And when we flew out of Moscow to London with the president, he was going to debrief Margaret Thatcher after his summit with Mikhail Gorbachev. And I was on the backup plane. So it was the same, looks like Air Force One, only it's the other plane that follows. And I was on that plane going to London and I was seated next to Julie Petersmeyer, who at the time was named Julie Andrews. And she was going to be my immediate boss because she was head of visits. And so I had an interview with her on the plane coming back from Moscow to London. And and then I met Ambassador Roosevelt formally in her office, and she offered me the job. So it was pretty quick, and it felt right. I loved working in the advance office. I had gone through a time where I was sort of not super happy there, and I don't really know why looking back at it, but I finally kind of embraced everything there. And then when I was offered this job, it really felt like the right move. Okay. And it was a great change.
Okay. Well, good. I thank you for all that information too. I was picturing that. I've read books about and seen movies about, what it was like with, the bugs. Probably still is that way in Russia, but I imagine this, the thing on a football game where they put the injured player in when they, check them out on the sidelines. I thought about your little pop-up conference room or whatever in a hotel room that sort of looked like that. That had to be weird.
See all these radio waves trying to, hit it, trying to hear what we were saying. We weren't usually talking about massively, again, not talking about I wasn't talking about nuclear proliferation. Right, we were talking about where the microphone was going to go in a room. So.
It still had to be weird to know that you were being, that everything was being. You didn't, listen to is one thing, watched is another. You don't know where,
Very strange. In the hotel rooms had no shower curtains. And we were told that by CIA briefings and things that there were cameras in the mirrors in the bathrooms, which was so disconcerting. Whether there really were or not, I have no idea, but I decided to embrace my inner exhibitionist and just, say whatever, people. Yeah. This is what gets you going.
Yeah, right. Here's a thrill, you Russian guy.
I'm here to do a job, and I'm it's not that fascinating. So
okay. So when you were working in the restaurants, you and your sisters, was it the kind of thing where you enjoyed what you were doing, or was it the kind of thing where you were like, oh, my parents are making me work in the restaurant type of thing? There
probably was a bit of both.
A little both, I guess.
we liked it. It was exciting. There were, it was a family affair in a lot of ways, because while my parents were there, many hours after they started the business, it just took off in a way they never anticipated. I mean, this was something my mother was going to do on her own, and it just exploded such that within, I'd have to get them to remind me, but within 6 months or a year, my dad was, had been trying to do both things, and he left he was a kind of a senior executive at Dean Witter, and he left and decided to do this full time with my mom. And so they, there were days when it was great, and there were days when it was like, oh my God, I can't eat another hamburger. I can't make another hamburger. And, you learn a lot about human nature. You learn a lot about management. You learn a lot about yourself in that process. And, at 15, 16, 17 years old, I'm not sure how self-aware I was, but it was definitely a learning process that benefited all of us to this day.
Okay. Well, if you were anything like me when you were those ages, you thought you were self-aware. Yes. and probably very knowledgeable about a lot of things. Now you look back and you go, oh, my self-awareness was pretty low, and I really didn't know much either. But
I tend to have I'm a little impatient with that age group these days. When I see what I think, I'll just use an image of leaning on a counter in a Burger King restaurant, right? Leaning on the counter when there's nothing to do. And I learned early on that there's always something to do, and we don't stop, and we don't lean, and we don't just spare off into space. There's something that can be done.
Yeah, always.
You're being paid to work a shift and be productive, and you have a break for a reason, and you use that time for the break. And so these restaurants were so busy that there was never really downtime. It was a whole different time and place in our country and society's dining options, and they were busy. So, we didn't lean. So when I think about recent generations of kids who are kind of like lost and don't really know what to do, or don't really think ahead or want to anticipate needs. And so while I'm a patient trainer in some ways, I'm also not. I also push people to recognize that just metaphorically, we can always be wiping off a counter or sweeping the floor.
Yeah, it sounds like you work best with someone who's willing to be trained.
Yes. And, but we, in that restaurant industry, we had people who, especially then, we had both the high school, football team and working there. And we also had, during school hours, and not, we had people who were challenged in some ways, and that they couldn't find other jobs. It was the maximum their skill sets could handle. And so it was a really great, view into how to manage people and how to motivate people of all different kinds of experience levels and skill sets and abilities. And so we definitely tried to help people who found value and meaning and purpose in working the broiler at a Burger King. And all too often those jobs are maligned and downtrodden as invaluable and not good jobs. I always hear good jobs, make good jobs, but these jobs were built to be for first jobs, to learn how to show up and be on time and do your job.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's so many times it seems like people who are making those kinds of judgments are people who are saying, well, with my background and my college degree, for example, why would someone go work at there? Or why would someone pick up garbage? Or why would someone, clean a septic tank? Or why would someone sweep the streets? And it's like, I kind of look at that and I go, how dare you? I mean, people, what's important that people are doing meaningful work, and every job out there, I think, is meaningful.
And have pride in their work.
Right.
Do it to the best of their ability. And I'll tell you what, being a manager of a Burger King or a McDonald's or any kind of restaurant at all is not an easy job.
It's a hard job.
I knew that I knew it was not, I knew early on, I didn't want to do it full time because it was not an easy job.
Right.
And I have different skill sets, I think that benefited my life in other ways, but those early trainings were foundational and fundamental to my own ability to do what I was able to do with my life.
Yeah. Good for you. More of us need to have that same type of experience, I think.
For sure.
You told us about, what the direction you went when you got out of college, Shelby, but what was the direction you thought you were headed when you went in?
Oh, yeah. So I was probably, I think I suffered from the same thing I still suffer from, which is an interest in a lot of different things. So what ended up happening is the things I was drawn to along the way ended up adding up to an aha of, oh, of course, no wonder I ended up in logistics, and no wonder I ended up organizing things. And because it just sort of one thing built on another, I was always interested. I took a concert promotion course from, what's the guy who was the main concert guy in the 70s? Everybody knew his name, that did big concerts, the festivals and things like that. And he did a seminar kind of thing at UCLA. And I was drawn to sign up for that and listened. So all of these kinds of things along the way led me to probably where I was supposed to go, but it was a little serendipitous, just the bottom line is I took advantage of the opportunities as they kind of came across. And my dad has a set of phrases we were growing up that was somebody else's, it wasn't his, but he would say, luck is the place where preparation and opportunity meet. So I just feel like things that came across my radar, I was ready for, and that wasn't luck. It was it just was the right time in the right place. And I took advantage of it and learn from it and move on. And so I think what happened is my life went in the direction it was supposed to go in, but I didn't drive it that way. It wasn't deliberate. I want to go to work in the White House and do presidential advance. I had no idea that job existed until 6 weeks before I took the job.
And how did that, you talked to us about how the State Department job came along, but how did this happen?
So that was basically through volunteering. I just got in the game. I went and I was interviewing for all kinds of different jobs out of college. I had just graduated in June of many 100 million years ago. And I was looking for a job just like every college kid at that point, interviewing with all different things. So it could have been advertising. It was marketing. It was brand management. It was, you name it. And I was leveraging whatever introductions were offered to me through family and friends and just the cold calling and all of those kind of things. And while I was absolutely interested in all of them, I think that probably what came across in the interviews and why I actually didn't get any of those jobs is I wasn't focused on, that wasn't my passion 100%. And that it was a bummer at the time, but things work out for a reason. And I think I was meant to do these other things. So I was not meant to get those jobs, but because if I had gotten the job as a junior broker at Dean Witter, because my father introduced me to the office manager, my life would have been very, very different. And I'm very grateful for the fact that he turned me down. And he said, come back when you have a little experience. Although I walked out of that person's office and there was a guy that was in high school with me who wasn't any smarter, wasn't any more interesting or more talented. And he was standing there with having had worked there for 6 months. And so we look back and there was a little bit of interesting inequities, and we had to prove, women definitely had to prove ourselves in different ways then. And but I want to thank him for turning me down.
And did you interview at the White House, or did you interview outside of the White House before you got that job at somewhere else?
So that's a good question. So I volunteered at at a political convention in Dallas, Texas in '84. So that was President Reagan's re-election convention where they renominated him for the second term. I volunteered. I painted signs. I was one of 2,000 young volunteers. People just like me, kind of in high school or in college and out of college, and interested in politics. I wasn't sure if that was my destiny, but I had an interest in what was going on. And so I, through a Burger King franchisee in Southern California, in Santa Barbara, her husband had been involved in the Nixon era White House. And so she connected me with the people involved with the convention. And I showed up not knowing a soul and just got to work. And so one of the things that happened, I tell the story, is I don't like salami sandwiches, and that's why my whole career went the direction that it went.
when salami sandwiches don't work out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, just don't. So they were passing out in a huge box of salami sandwiches for all of these like 2,000 volunteers. And it wasn't these cute little, you know, containers that we have these days for box lunches. It was a massive box with 2,000 sandwiches piled on top of each other. And they were disgusting. And so I couldn't even bring myself to eat it. And so I didn't, but what else do? You stand there while everybody's eating. And so I just got on the other side of the table and started handing them out with the people who were organizing it. And that was an unintentional, but very pivotal moment, because I got to know the people who were in charge, and they got to know me. I became a distinct person outside of 2000. Now I'm one of 2000 instead of one of the 2000.
Yeah.
And that really made all the difference. So I got to meet the people who were organizing it, and one of the presidential advance guys who was in charge of the young group, the youth groups for rallies. We ran in with signs and, you know, yelled at the night when they say, oh, and nominating the president. It was kind of exciting. And he said, come work on the campaign in California when the president kicks it off. It was a Labor Day kickoff. So that was in August of that same year. So September, I went and volunteered for a week. And then they called me, they said, you should work on the inaugural committee if he gets reelected. And I said, great. And I walked away kind of going, I don't know what the inaugural committee is.
You gotta look that word up.
So I called the people who are in charge, a man named Jim Hooley, and who I'd worked with on this week-long thing. And I said, I'm calling to see about, you know, how I could maybe work on the inaugural committee. And he said, well, I'm calling to offer you a job on the inaugural committee. So I flew back to Washington with, you know, a round trip ticket. My dad's advice was, you know, negotiate your salary so you can get home. Thanks for the vote of confidence. Yes. And practical, pragmatic, good fatherly advice.
That's right.
And but I used the backside of that ticket to come home and pack more clothes to move back to Washington, where I ended up there for 28 years. And because I had been offered at the end of that, myself and many other colleagues who worked on the inaugural committee were offered jobs in the administration. And I was fortunate enough to be offered one in the advance office.
And by the way, in that story you just told, it was the lesson from Burger King came out with the salami sandwiches, right? There's work to be done. If there's a box of sandwiches here, and they need, even though I'm not eating any of them, and it is lunchtime or whatever, I'm gonna distribute them. And look where it led you.
Idle hands, right? You know, there's never the job. There's always something to get done. So I just helped. It was sort of, you're right. It was probably a natural instinct or a learned instinct from my parents and from that work experience, but keep busy, and maybe a personally, a personal insecure preservation mechanism, so that, you know, I had a purpose for being there instead of just standing there. Just whatever it is, it worked.
Do you remember how long it took you to be comfortable working in the White House? Because I imagine you're 22, you come in, you've been a volunteer, now you're employee, and where do they put you? They put you right in the White House, right in the thick of things. But you said before, you know, very junior. Of course, you're super junior, but and I'm just trying to imagine what it. Yeah, what do you remember? What it felt like, and how long it took you to be like, oh, I belong here.
Yeah, I don't think I still feel like I belong here. Okay. That belong there. I mean, I'm sort of joking. It is a place of kind of, there's a mystique and a magical quality about it for whatever administration you work for. It's really an honor. And I think that's one of the things that was imparted upon us, our crowd, when we came in, that we were there to work at the pleasure of the president and the presidency equally, meaning the person in office we worked for, but we also had a job to uphold the reputation and standards of the presidency, so that it was always, you know, a place of respect and honor. So yeah, it was tough because you know, it's a learning curve, and you're thrown into the boiling pot and expected to do it right. And there's some training, but not a lot. It's definitely baptism by fire, and just get in there and do it. So I remember calling, you know, my parents. We didn't have cell phones. And so I walked down. I didn't want to call in the office because people could hear me. And so I walked down to the payphone in the bottom of the old executive office building, and and maybe the Russians could hear me then. I don't know, but I called my parent. I called my parents, and I remember crying. I can't do this. I don't know. That's too hard. I don't know what to do. And my dad just sort of, my mom did the oh honey, it'll be okay. And my dad sort of slapped me upside the head through the phone lines and said, just get a grip and go back up there and do it.
Right.
So I did. He's a Marine. Don't take too many prisoners in that sense. And so I did. But it was an evolution, we learned lots of different things. And I think that was the fun part, is every day was different. So, we had kind of a standard process of what we did for every single visit and every single event that happened, but there was always something new and unique to experience. So that kept me mentally and physically engaged in the whole process.
And since you've left your government work and went into, became an entrepreneur, I'm just curious, do you imagine now what's going on inside of these places? And I don't mean now, but sort of every time there's a change in administration or something, are you sort of putting your hat on and being like, I wonder I'm just, because I think I might be, I don't know, I think I might be doing that.
Yeah, a little bit. I think one of the things that's, I may not agree with a certain administration's policies, but I do have respect, again, for the office of the presidency and the purpose of our democracy and our government and the role that plays in keeping us free. And that's a huge part of my DNA is freedom, liberty, freedom of speech, freedom to pursue your dreams, freedom to pursue happiness. And this is a very unique quality of our country. And that's something that was imparted upon me early in the DNA of working in the White House. So while I absolutely have the right to and feel I have plenty of opinions on policy decisions of different administrations, I also have a great deal of respect for what they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And that there's there's no rest for the weary. It's just, even if it's self-imposed problems, there's always something brewing and that you're dealing with, and fires to put out. And, some administrations organize themselves better, because it's interesting, because we have this strata of the bureaucracy, literally the civil service stratosphere of employees is there for a reason, so that there is some continuity in the changeover in power, and that the basic stuff can get done. The building runs, the correspondence unit can get greeting cards out or whatever. There's a thousand things we could talk about what happens no matter who's president. But the political side of things is a really challenging place to be. So while, we can have a debate about politics, about the policies, I have a lot of empathy and respect for the fact that anybody stepping into a job in the White House is going to be working from about 6 a.m. until midnight. And it's exhausting, and you're never off duty. We had pagers. To this day, the tone that's in that pager literally makes my flesh peel off my bones. It's like a chalkboard, because we would work until 8 or 9 or 10 o'clock at night before a trip or later. And that we didn't have email. We had to physically get information around the White House, and the messengers who were there by day weren't there at night. So we were often in our office there late, in our nylons, pantyhose, because we never wore pants. I mean, way different era. And walking through the halls of the White House, taking off our heels and putting them at the guard station in the West Wing, and walking through the entire building in our stocking feet, because we were exhausted. And the cold marble on our feet reminded us, it was a kind of grounding to remind us where we were. So we just had to be able to push through a lot of things. And that pager, when we walked out of the office, if it went off, we usually went to dinner afterwards, because my colleague, who's now the chief of staff at the Reagan Library, the chief administrative officer, Joanne Drake, and I would go out to dinner afterwards a lot, because inevitably we'd get a phone call of a change or something happened, or the night before. So you just didn't sleep. And that pager, when you had to go then find a payphone or beg somebody to use their own phone, because there were no cell phones, keeping a pocket full of change and that kind of stuff was just what we had to do. But now it's 24/7. Now, you know, now you can't turn it off. And that has got to be just one added challenge from the time we were there.
Yeah, it's like, people say, well, geez, president, whatever, can't keep their staff. There's all this turnover. And I think to myself, well, no, of course there's all this turnover. I mean, you get in for great reasons, right? You believe in whatever who you're working for believes in, right? But my gosh, you can only work so much. And now it's just so easy to get dragged in. Pagers, by the way, I had one for, I think, 10 or 12 years, and I know exactly what you're talking about, because after a while it's just, but now it's like every notification thing in the world would go off, and you gotta, and I think the expectation is if it goes off, you jump, right? It's not like, well, call me late when I get up, I'm not gonna.
I worked on the McCain campaign, was the first campaign I really worked on sort of after, on the road, being on the road. And it was such a different environment because of smartphones and getting the schedules, real time, and things changing so much, and having just everybody get off the plane and go sit in the stands to watch the speech or something, which they've all heard 15 times, and so they weren't paying attention, and they were all heads down on their phone. And I remember kind of saying, can we kind of, if you're in the picture, can you look up and look
Right.
like you're paying attention? But that's how people manage the campaign now, is on this little teeny little screen. It's both a great advantage and a curse at the same time.
Yeah. I'm glad you gave it. What I wonder is, will it ever go back? Is that thing is just so out of the bag that you can't, your genie's so out of the bottle, you can't put it back in? Because I wonder how much more people can take, like how, anyway, the way you describe that president, the way you describe that perspective of being in that arena, I think was super helpful, because I think most people listening, they have an opinion about, everybody's got an opinion about, how things work in government and in the White House, say, in particular. But I feel like very few people have an appreciation for, one, what it's like to, you get elected and then you have to put, in a period of a couple of months, you have to put a whole team together, and then you don't switch till a certain day, and then you switch, and the expectation is that everything's just going to be like running like you've been in there for 10 years or something. And then as in the White House, you're really the executor of the legislature, right? So the legislature, Congress, they make laws, or they whatever, and then the White House's job is to implement all of that stuff, which feels like a much harder job than making the rules, And so you described it as entrepreneurial a while ago, and I can kind of see how it could be, because you got a boss and you got a customer, right? And it's,
well, and as a representative of the administration in power at that time, that was elected into office to
right.
push the agenda that they were elected, the platform that they stood on to get elected, there is a change is inevitable in that. And so you come in and change something, add to, take away from what's been there before. So there's constant iteration, there's constant review of policies. Times change, so you've got to look at what's happening, and then you got to be ready to deal with what's coming and be forward thinking on this stuff. Whereas the agencies, they have both sides of that. The agencies really implement the policies,
okay.
and then they also help the president from a subject matter expertise, provide them with information in order to be able to drive change or drive the agendas. So if that makes sense, they put on both sides, right? They push information into the White House so that the president can have the information that he or she needs to push to make good decisions and to govern. And at the same time, they once the laws have passed, then they go back into the agencies, and those things are administrated, and we have bureaucracy that then they rule by regulation, which is an interesting tactic too, because that's that's when they get challenged sometimes. That happens in every administration, where an administration tries to put something into action. That's happening right now, when the legislature doesn't pass the law, so they try to put it in as a process
Okay.
and a
little
regulation.
workaround.
Yeah.
A regulation.
Yeah, so
okay.
we have lots of back doors in our government to get things done,
Yeah,
even
okay.
though the wheels seem sometimes to turn slowly.
How did you end up making the decision to leave and start your own business?
Probably because whether DNA or just experience with my family, I knew that while I loved working in the jobs I worked in, that working in another government agency really just probably didn't do it. I did go out. I worked with other people. I worked in the Republican Senatorial Committee. I worked at the Department of Energy for a little while as head of advance. But the bottom line is that I was sort of meant to do my own thing, and I really like the idea of my own schedule and the creative process that can come from being on your own and out there to develop something that's unique. And so I knew, but then I also sort of said, well, what do you know how to do? And that was put delegations together and visits together. So I just started Practical Protocol, which was about fundamentally helping business leaders and government leaders alike take away all the noise from what they were doing when they were meeting with each other or traveling or visiting, et cetera, so that they could focus on the substance of what they were trying to do. So I'm the trains, planes, security, the facilitator of the platform around which they could do their work.
Okay. So basically you were the one who said, leave it up to me. Don't
worry about where you're getting picked up or when or how. We'll have it all lined out for them. You don't have to think about the travel time. We'll factor that in. You don't have to think about where you're sitting at the table. We will have thought through that. And in some cases a lot of times we work with them directly to say, okay, what's your objective? What are you trying to do? And even the seating at the table, or how you host a lunch or dinner, how you show up in a meeting, being prepared, making sure their prepared remarks are prepared, whether we wrote them or just facilitated getting them there, the thinking through all the details so that they could just only think about the deal, if whatever that was, if it was a business deal or if it was a relationship building exercise, diplomatic conversations, those things.
Got it. And you said when you were answering the how did it happen question, Shelby, you said, you were born with an entrepreneurial mindset, and there's a debate about whether people can be born as entrepreneurs or are they made. And you said you could argue both sides, which I found interesting, but not surprising. But what is your viewpoint on that? Because that's something I have a belief system about. I don't, and I think it's right based on my experience and what I've seen, but I'm really interested in what your perspective is on it.
So I believe in taking ownership, and that's something that comes from my parents. So owning what you do, taking ownership, that's taking responsibility. And that is an entrepreneurial mindset in my mind. So that can be had in a company as well as in an entrepreneurial business. So somebody inside a company can be an intrapreneur. I think that's how the sticky notes were developed at 3M, is somebody came up with the idea and so innovated and et cetera. But it's also can be from a leadership or a management standpoint too, is to think entrepreneurially, think ahead, think how you can benefit your employer, how you can be a great employee. You can have an entrepreneurial mindset when you're doing that and not be an entrepreneur. The distinction is waiting to be told what to do, waiting to, not taking responsibility or ownership of a situation or a problem or a challenge, thinking ahead on things. So with what we just did recently is 3 partners and I formed the Global School of Entrepreneurship. And we are all entrepreneurs, and some, I've been through the Harvard Business School's Owner President Managed program, which is a great program for entrepreneurs and business owners. But I loved it, but you have to go 3 weeks a year for 3 years, and the format was great for me, but not for everybody, because you can't always take away that kind of time from your business to learn about management or strategy or marketing, and it was a great place to meet other like-minded people as yourself and build that community. But so we decided to start the Global School of Entrepreneurship, which is an accredited MBA program for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs, because it's addressing the needs where the entrepreneur needs it. The curriculum is meant to be done so that the things you look at are applied to your own business and your own life, and not sort of a third-party case study, which are useful for reading and understanding things. But when we get into the room and discuss it as entrepreneurs, we don't discuss that particular case study necessarily. That's the homework and the sort of, let's get the context right. But let's talk about how it relates to what we're doing now and reality, and taking theoretical and putting it into practice. And the case study method is actually meant to be that way. I think it's supposed to be real stuff, but it's still a little out there when you're not talking about it as it relates to you. And you're talking about it in the third, kind of in the, external. So we do it in every 2 weeks. We meet with our cohort of 8 to 10 entrepreneurs and a dedicated professor and visiting lecturers who are subject matter experts, who talk about the things that we need to check off the list in an MBA program. But really, MBA programs in general weren't meant for entrepreneurs. And what we've tried to do is reinvent the MBA to address an entrepreneur's interests, needs, and help them become better entrepreneurs. So to your point, built or made, I think internally I'm an entrepreneur at heart, just from an emotional, spiritual perspective. It's from a DNA, just a way of being. But that doesn't mean I can't learn fundamentals of business and be taught ways to look at things entrepreneurially, whether I'm in a business or on my own. So education is important. All lifelong learning is important, is a philosophy that we have. So this is a way for entrepreneurs, whether, they just got into it and all of a sudden they have a big business, and a lot of them have a little imposter syndrome, and they want to come back and kind of double check the boxes to make sure that they're not missing something.
Right.
And so this is a way for us to share our experiences with each other and learn and grow in a way that is meeting the entrepreneur where he or she needs to be met.
And are you suggesting then that most of the MBA programs out there are made for people who are interested in becoming executives, as opposed to, is that what you're, okay. And the Harvard experience that you mentioned, and then the MBA thing, there's nothing out there like this, the real motivation for you to start this school, or was it something else?
There really is nothing. I believe we have a unique offering. There are programs that offer an entrepreneurial bent in them. So the programming is they say is entrepreneurial. But then when you look at how it's delivered, it doesn't jive with that, because you have to go away for 2 years. Well, entrepreneurs who are involved in their business, who actually are doing it, they can't leave their business for 2 years. Right. Or go away every weekend and leave their family and their business every other weekend or every weekend for 2 years. That's been the traditional model. Now, with COVID and with the acceleration of online delivery, things like podcasts and all those things, the Zoom era, they are kind of coming up to speed and recognizing that there's there's an opportunity there. I don't want to give too many ideas to business schools, but we're trying to take advantage of an opportunity in a market with the technology that's there, to be able to meet the entrepreneur where they need to be met and still provide an education for them that gives them that accredited MBA. If they so desire. A lot of entrepreneurs don't think they need an MBA. I respect that, but I think that we can benefit from both, from experience and education.
Well, I think because I've talked about this a bunch of times, and I always ask people who have MBA next to their name all the time why they have that, and it comes down to pride, right? They're proud of their accomplishment, and they want to have it out there. But I always felt like, for me, I never needed an MBA to do what I did, but I could sure use the education. Right? Yeah. So who's go ahead.
There's an aha moment all along the way, right? There's something. The point of what we're trying to do in the school is have both sharing from each other, that we learn from each other. I think that's, for me, that was missing in the OPM program at Harvard. Is I love the program and I'm an advocate for it, and it serves a purpose. But I wanted to hear the experience of the people in the room as much as I wanted to hear the professor's formula for something. And I respect that these professors, they do a lot of research. I don't have a ton of numbers behind me on things. There's a lot more the entrepreneurial gut reaction about market and everything. And we'll see if it plays out. We're building, we've already got we'll launch our second cohort in January and our third in March. We'll graduate our first student who's going through the MBA My Way program, which is a one-on-one program for an entrepreneur who just can't even fit into the flexible program that we have for entrepreneurs, and needs to do it in their own way, kind of a very bespoke way. And that student will graduate very soon. And, we've launched this within the year. So it will be 1 year that he completes his MBA, and he's doing it. He is a very successful, very high dollar business, high volume business. And he's doing it because he does a lot of business in Asia and in other parts of the world where those letters after your name mean something. And to them, whether that's right or not, it's just what it is, and he felt that it would help him with credibility with his colleagues and customers, even though he's got a massively successful business.
Yeah. So it's a protocol thing, right? Yeah. So first of all, who are ideal candidates for the Global School of Entrepreneurs, and how do you find out about us? How does somebody get involved in this?
So our website is gse.mba. And the irony of that is it launches Monday. We already are in process. We have students and we have a curriculum and speakers and things like that. But our website is just coming up. So there's a true entrepreneurial project there.
Yeah.
But we're looking for people who want to learn and contribute to the process of growing entrepreneurs. So it's not just a taker mentality of I need to receive this, but I want to be a part of giving into the process and sharing my experiences as an entrepreneur and being open to asking questions and the humility to know that we have the opportunity to learn something at every turn to make the world a better place. And so our big picture objective is to touch every corner of the world and offer cohorts in the languages and in the corners of the world where people have a hard time getting to education, and to communities that are underserved in that. And we can put together custom cohorts with businesses if they want to put their people through. A lot of entrepreneurs want their own company people to go through an MBA program. They're willing to fund them through an MBA program, but they would like it to have an entrepreneurial bent because they are entrepreneurs and they want their people to come out with a mindset and a thought process that is geared towards entrepreneurship. So there's just a lot. There's a wide variety of people. We can do cohorts that are all startups. And therefore the learning there is really focused. It's the same kind of fundamental ground premise of learning of an MBA program and of an accredited MBA program, but the conversation becomes focused on what a startup might need to know.
Yeah. Okay. So it's really customizable to the client, to the entrepreneurial
Very much so.
client.
Very much so.
That's an awesome URL, by the way, gse.mba. Congratulations on that.
We went over the Global School of Entrepreneurship, right? It's not very, and most people can't spell the word entrepreneur.
Yeah.
So it's,
that's so funny because I can spell it, but I type it wrong all the time.
I have to make sure every single time.
All the time. So in the little bit of time we have left, and there's so many things that I didn't get to, unfortunately, but I do want to talk about your book, and I want, Civility Rules, and I want to talk about the new book that I think the title is The Secret, but you told me a little bit about the new book that you're working on about your grandfather. Maybe you're working on 2 books. You're working on 2 books.
Yeah, I'm working on more than that, but for brevity's sake, weave got.
So let's talk to Shelby, the author here.
Yeah, it's sometimes things just, I started on this because protocol and international affairs and international relations and diplomacy and all those things was sort of now part of my DNA. I started thinking about civility in society a while ago. About 10 years ago, I wrote a chapter for a book called The Power of Civility, and the chapter was on political civility, which I have determined is an oxymoron.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
that was 10 years ago I wrote
No,
that.
10 years ago it was. So now it's, I don't even know if there's a word for it.
Exactly. So it's been a long process, but I finally got it out of me and on paper. I've had it in my head for a long time, and I've been, giving speeches around it, et cetera. But I finally got it all out and into sort of a format on paper called Civility Rules, which is the play on words, because I use George Washington's Rules of Civility as sort of my base document for thinking through this. And I analyzed each of the 110 rules in that public domain document, and put them into categories. I made a spreadsheet. I put each rule in a cell, and then I categorized them. And when I sorted the spreadsheet, literally, they came out into a number of about 5 categories, which is trust, respect, honor, duties, humility, courtesy. Those are the fundamental of every one of those rules. They all come back to that. So that's and I credit Bill Bennett, who is my business partner's cousin, and I've done some work with his wife's organization and things. And I credit him with helping inspire the format of the book, because he wrote the rules of, or the book of virtues, where he takes character qualities and gives examples of it through literature and through time. And I said, okay, I want to focus essays on these qualities, so that we look at civility through a lens that is about character traits, values, and how we can onboard that ourselves. And it's not so esoteric. So I share stories about these different qualities. And my theory there is, if you roll all that up, that leads to a civilized life, a civil person. And it's a practice of civility that I created for myself, because it's, if it were easy, everybody'd be doing it. So the idea is, how can we inject a little civility in our lives and in our culture and in our businesses and in our world, in our politics, but that it starts with the word I. And, but ironically, I didn't want to use the word I in the book, because I hate, it's awful. I mean, these are fun to do. At the same time, I'm very self-conscious of these podcasts, because you talk about yourself all the time. And it's really weird for me. I wanted this to be something that hopefully would be beneficial to other people. But for the most part, it has to be onboarded as a personal practice. And so there's a lot of we and us, and what we might think about, and not you, not what you need to do, but what I'm trying to do and what we might think about as a culture.
Right. So it's not about telling someone what people don't like to be told what to do, right? It's about, it's funny.
But when has that ever been successful, right? Long term, you can get people to jump through a hoop, but eventually they're going to find another hoop, and it's not yours.
Right. It's funny how I find it, and I say funny, but not. It's not really funny. But when it comes to civility in whether it's government or social media or whatever it is, that you kind of particularly in government, you hold everybody to a standard. You've got a position in government. You must be. There must be something good about you. Right? Really, really good about you. But as soon as there becomes a disagreement, it's everybody's is all of a sudden a liar kind of thing. And I was like, if that's the thing I have to pull out when I disagree with somebody, I can't imagine why I would have ever selected a person like that. Right? But that's kind of, and I'm going off on a little tangent here, but it just kind of makes me sad. Because disagreeing with someone is not the same as the person being a liar. And if that's the first thing that I can think of to that's my argument against it. That person is lying. Or I just think it's so sad.
that's the default right now in media and in conversations, is that if somebody looks at something differently than you, then they're a liar. How is that a logical jump?
I don't
It's
know.
not.
And
It's
not
a
something you would
different
ever want applied
perspective.
to you. It's
Yeah.
not anything you'd ever want applied to you, but you're willing to apply it to someone else as if they're different. It's hard. It's sad. It's what it for me.
It goes to giving people the benefit of the doubt, not jumping to conclusions. We're watching court cases right now, waiting for verdicts on things, and it's getting fomented by people who want somebody acquitted and somebody who want them prosecuted and jailed. Everybody's entitled to that viewpoint, but there's a lot of facts that we don't know, and that's the process of a court process, is to get to that. And I don't know what the answer is on some of these kinds of things. I want to hear the outcome, and I have an opinion. But it's my opinion, and I need to own it. So a friend of mine, it was her husband. I love them so much, and her husband. We were having breakfast and hadn't seen them in a while, and he was very vociferously saying, "Well, this is the way it is. This is the relationship with China. This is this." And she kept, because she's been they've been very involved with this process with me with the book. In fact, I came up with a name for the book at their house, and she kept poking him, saying, "You got to say, I believe." Instead, I believe that this is what it is, because there are very, very few people, if we really get down to it, who can say everything that they say, that they are 100% sure that they are right.
The older I get, the one thing I'm absolutely sure about is that I'm not absolutely sure about anything. Even if I have a very strong belief and a lot of experience to back it up, I don't think I'm ever in a position anymore to say it is definitely this. I could say I'm pretty certain it's this, because like you say, you don't, something I knew really well 10 years ago and pretend to know really well now, even though I haven't done anything except remember what I knew 10 years ago and then say that it's right. Good. I'm glad you brought that up. And I'm glad that she pokes him and says, I got to.
It was fun. She's like, "Tim, you got to do." But he, in the Entrepreneurs Organization, which I've been very involved with for many years, one of our prime tenets is to speak from experience to each other.
Right.
So we do that in our forum context, but we also, if we really are an adherent and a practitioner of it, and I put that in my book because I think it's a really great quality, is we try to speak from experience at all times. And that, I think that just builds credibility and trust and respect. And it also leaves the door open for that intellectual humility and that possibility that there might be another way. Just because this was my experience doesn't mean that it's the only answer.
Right. Gestalt, I think, is what they call that. Yes. Okay. So couple minutes on your new books, or the books you're working on.
Yeah, I'm really excited. In the next month, less than a month, we launch Undaunted, which is the story of my grandfather's life, which is it's written as a novel, so it's kind of fun and easy to read, but it's all true. I think the only thing that we made up are some of the conversations, because we weren't there for them. But he was in my life till I was 28 years old, and he was a pioneer aviator. He was the first to attempt to solo fly around the world. And so talk about gut and grits, and, he was right out there, literally flying, flying on nothing, and helping usher in the space age in a sense. He was right on that cusp, and all the astronauts that came, the early astronauts were test pilots. He was also then the test pilot for the P-38, the engineering test pilot. So he was out there flying it before it was built and telling the engineers, okay, you got to tweak this and do that. And then he went out and trained all the test pilots, all the people to fly it. And so all those early test pilots looked to my grandfather as their kind of guru, and they all became our first astronauts. So he starts with his, I think the biggest tangible symbol to illustrate what his impact and where he falls in history's notes are that his pilot's license was signed by Orville Wright and by himself, as was de rigueur. And then it went to the moon with Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, and they both signed it. So we have this old pilot's license that has been around the world and to the moon and back. And that this was sort of emblematic to me of what his impact on the world of aviation has been. And he's little known and not long remembered, but you go look him up and he's there. We're just trying to re-engage a new audience with his history and tell his story, because it's an epic movie in the making.
Phenomenal.
It's called Undaunted. His name is Jimmy Mattern, Mattern, Jimmy Mattern.
Well, I'm glad you're getting that story out there. Congratulations.
Yeah, it's very exciting. It was a family affair. We started an LLC, an entrepreneurial adventure, with my sisters and my cousins, and we've brought it from concept to fruition, and we're really excited about it.
Nice. And are you working on one other?
I've got a couple others, but the next one is called The Joy Journey. And so that one started a long time ago, but some of the others have, sometimes different projects take a lead.
Sure.
But in fact, I launched an e-commerce site called thejoyjourney.life, which I've never seen a website with the .life, end game there. And so it's joyjourney.life, and it's all products, tangible products, even though things don't bring us joy really. But there are sometimes when, I find it's fun to have these things around that inspire us. And so I put together a website that was supposed to be a companion to the book, but the book is coming out in probably mid next year. And it's all about finding joy in the journey of life. So, and once again, it's not because I'm always joyful. I try to bring joy wherever I go. It is my middle name. So about 10 years ago, I kind of decided I needed to own that and be conscious of my, we talk about our carbon footprint. So I guess maybe I'm going to make up a term right now and call it our joy footprint in this world, and what we leave behind, and how we help others find joy in their journey as well.
Well, you've definitely left behind some joy today. I do really appreciate this opportunity to have this conversation with you and get to know you better and explore at least a small portion of I think I'm going to have you back if you want, because there's so many things that I want people to know about you, and I want to ask you about and know more about than I was able to cover today. So
would be delighted.
Maybe, would that be okay?
Yes. Okay. Yes. And there'll be lots of people that we have in our school that that I'm happy to pass on some great lecturers and people with great ideas if you want for your podcast. It's always
that would be fun. And I know you mentioned you sort of threw out there that I could potentially participate at some point, so that has me intrigued as well. But we'll have you come in later.
Be a subject matter expert. I just want to open the world of entrepreneurship up to as many minds as possible, and in a way that they can handle it, in a new and creative delivery mechanism.
Thank you for that, because I'm all about that. Yeah, I love it. Great. I'm glad you got that off the ground, and again, I've just enjoyed this a lot. So thank you. And how do you want people to reach out to you? I mean, you gave us the website for the school, which is gsc.mba.
They can check out Joy Journey. Yeah, they can check out joyjourney.life. You can find the Civility Rules book on my website, or Amazon, or Barnes & Noble. My website is shelbyscarbrough.com. And if you spell it wrong, you'll probably get there anyway. A lot of people add an extra O. So I think I've covered that base. But it's fun. I mean, I'd love to hear from people. I'd like to hear how, if they read the book, how it impacted their life or not. Let's have a discussion. If maybe they poke some holes in it, and maybe they don't believe everything that I believe, but that's part of what I really found that it was part of. I believe that civility is a really big part of what importance in democracy, because we've gotten to a point where we're shutting down free speech because we don't like what we hear, and that's not a democracy when there's one voice. So we need to be open to hearing things that don't make us happy. And there's plenty in this world that I hear from people that doesn't make me happy, but that doesn't mean they don't have a right to say it.
It also doesn't mean that there's not a middle ground, or a way to agree on something and move forward, as opposed to just deciding you're not going to agree and never move forward.
Exactly. And it really harkens back to personal responsibility. So the ownership concept again. Right. So there's entrepreneurship all the way through everything I touch, because it's just kind of inherent it's just there. I can't help it.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Shelby.
Thank you. Thank you. I so enjoyed the time, and thank you. Look forward to talking to you again.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for listening to this episode of the How'd It Happen podcast, where we believe that success doesn't happen unless you make it happen. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. And while you're there, please rate it and leave a comment as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the show, ideas for future guests, or whatever you'd like to share. And of course, you can always find me at MikeMalatesta.com. See you next time. Thanks again for listening to the How'd It Happen podcast.